Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm happy to see so many of you made it up this early, bright and early, considering how hard a lot of you partied last night. As you can tell from my voice, it sounds like I did the karaoke, but I actually didn't. I just sound terrible in the mornings. Very happy to be here. I'm extremely so humbled and happy to see so many of you here at PDXCON. It's been really fun talking to you. A lot of you yesterday. We had great talks about the business side of things, games, modding, and I hope to be able to continue the conversation today. And I have hopefully a little presentation for you here that will get your kind of ideas flowing, and you can come up and pitch me a game later as I'm riding the elevator down, and I can't escape. So I'll get to that. So let's rip into it right away. This is the overview of what I'll be going over today with you guys. And I'll also give a shout out to everyone on Twitch also watching. Welcome to the stream. So this is the overview, and let's jump right into it. So who am I? My title is the VP of Business Development at Paradox. I've been with Paradox now 7.5 years and 10 days and a few minutes now. Before Paradox, I have a background in film and engineering, and then I joined Avalanche Studios that made Just Cause. I was hired on a Monday, and on that Friday of the same week, they fired me. Me and 74 other brave souls who were let go because of the financial crisis, and a publisher in the US had to cancel the project. So that's the way the cookie crumbles, and I had to kind of escape, and then I crawled my way back to Avalanche. I worked on a couple of other AAA games that never saw the light of day, and I decided, screw this, I need to work at a publisher so I can cancel the games. Paradox had an opening in marketing, and I applied for that job. Susanna was the one who was hiring, and I said, I know very little about marketing. I know games, project management and game design. And she was like, do you know how to retweet? I was like, sure, of course I know what a retweet is. Never used Twitter. But I was like, how hard can it be? So I got the job, and then very quickly on, I kind of moved on to production, and then quite quickly to business development, which at Paradox essentially means finding new games. Today we do a lot more in business development, but yeah. So in the marketing department, I worked on Victoria 2, was the first PDS game I did marketing on. We were about to announce that, and why I'm telling this story, it's very relevant to what I keep hearing all the time on Reddit and on the forums right now, is that we were about to announce Victoria 2, and everyone was just talking about Crusader Kings 2, every time. Whenever we announced anything on Victoria, everyone was like, where's Crusader Kings 2? They didn't want to hear about any Victoria, just Crusader Kings. Now, everyone's talking about Victoria 3. So we'll see what happens. So I'm a huge nerd, unless that was very evident. I play a lot of games. It's not only required for my job, but it's also required for me to want to live every day. So I play a lot of games, and I hope you guys pick up some of the great stuff. Anyone who played Drakar Demoner, it's the best pen and paper Swedish role-playing game ever. TIE Fighter, it's the best computer game ever made. Anyone play TIE Fighter? X-Wing, baby, yeah, there you go. And then I threw in a couple of newer titles, so if there's some younger kids in the audience, they would also. And again, like my examples of newer games is Dota and Fable, so I'm really turning old. I'm also in the management team with Fred and Susanna and the rest of the people at Paradox. So let's do this. I'll start off with a little disclaimer and say that Paradox is a very weird company, unless you haven't noticed that by now. What applies to us does not necessarily apply to everyone else in this industry. So don't take the things I say as, take them with a huge grain of salt, like a barrel of salt. So let's move on. Bear with us with the technical challenges here. I get a lot of pitches sent to me. Me and my team, and in general Paradox, we get a lot of ideas sent to us all the time. And everyone has, and there's a saying in Hollywood that everyone has an idea for a great movie, right? It's the same in gaming. Everyone has a great idea for a game. But it's not necessarily the idea itself that's all that's needed. Anyone want to guess how many pitches were sent to us last year, 2016? 2000, that's very, very high. It's actually, yes. 300 is closer. The actual number was 440 pitches. And I'm talking about pitches where I have a document and I can go back and look at every single one of those 440 pitches. If you catch me, I've had several games pitched to me already at PDXCON. Those wouldn't be included in this number. So in reality, we look at maybe 800 to 1,000 actual game ideas per year. And these come from a lot of different sources. Game Connection is a specific trade show, but we have our website where you can submit ideas. We have an internal team, PDS, and our studio in Umeå. They pitch us ideas. And then most other stuff comes from business contacts. But this is the first round. When you look at the second round of how many games that we actually proceed with, we see that we narrow this off quite quickly. Very few of the games that are pitched externally end up making it past the first phase. Most of them are coming from the business contacts. And in the end, out of these 44, I can't tell you exactly how many we sign, but we're very narrow in our selection of games. Of course, you know this because we are a niche company and we make niche games for niche audiences. A niche, of course, doesn't mean small, but I'll come back to that later. So why do we say no? And these numbers are for Q1. That's Q1 for publisher business speak. For Q1 2017, one of the main reasons we say no is that it's just, we do strategy, RPG, and management games largely. If you pitch us a action shooter with VR, it's probably not for Paradox, right? So we say no to those. We say no to games that don't match our pillars. And I'll come back to the pillars, but they simply have too little replayability, aren't hardcore, wouldn't really make you guys happy. That's the short answer. And thirdly, it might be issues that has to do with the developer, somebody we don't want to work with, or we don't think that they have what it takes. Requirements for working with us are fairly high today compared to a few years ago. This is roughly where we see the pitches coming from. This is again Q1. You can see that Slovenia is punching way above its weight. In this case, I don't know if it's an anomaly, I have to talk to my team, but most of the stuff does come from the countries that are most prolific when it comes to game development. The US, of course, but Western Europe, but a fair bit of Eastern Europe as well. And we see the genre distribution is all over the place, but most of the time nowadays people actually understand what our business is and actually pitch us stuff that is close to what we actually are looking for, which is RPGs, strategy, and management games. But we still get a lot of other things as well. And sometimes it's very hard to classify games. So let's get into the meat of things. And I'm going to generally try to rush through this so we can get to the questions in the end, because that's the real fun part. When you start saying, like, you're an idiot, why didn't you sign this? Like, my idea is great. And we'll get to that. So misconceptions about pitching in general. One of the biggest misconceptions is that people are like, shh, keep it secret, keep it safe. An idea, somebody might steal my idea. And besides these, 1,000 pitches I've seen per year, I talked to a lot of other people who have pitches and stuff, and I've never heard anyone complain that, hey, somebody stole my idea. That actually somebody stole the idea and went and actually created something that was commercially viable and made a lot of money, and they're like, I missed out. I've never encountered that. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but it's vastly overplayed. And what we get from a lot of people who maybe aren't that experienced, where they're like, they don't want to share their story because they're afraid it'll kind of get out. The idea is so pure and good, you can't be shared. That's not quite true. The second thing is, and this is hard to hear, for me especially since I have so many good ideas, is that an idea is actually worth something. And Johan Andersson will quite quickly tell you that this is not true, because he has even more and even better ideas, and it doesn't take you all the way. A good idea is okay, but you need also money to be able to bring it to life, and you also need a good team that can bring it to life. Without those things, an idea in itself is not necessarily worth that much. A third thing that I get from a lot of, especially indie developers, is that they don't want to pitch because, our presentation, our deck isn't that pretty. I don't want to send something to you, it looks ugly. I'm not going to share the Victoria 3 pitch. No, the pitch that we get from internal teams, but they're not necessarily the prettiest pitches, but they're very clear in conveying what they want to do in the next game. So you don't have to have a pretty pitch. You don't have to have a ton of graphical assets. So let's jump into the fun bit. So the actual useful tips for somebody who wants to pitch. The first one is that you have to know your audience. You have to know who you're pitching to. And if you pitch a puzzle, music, rhythm-based game for the Nintendo DS, which might be a fine game, you should not be pitching it to Paradox. Because we do not do those kind of games. We don't understand them. We're completely the wrong company to do it. And you have to remember that when you put something in a pitch and send it to somebody, it'll send a specific signal. And I'm doing a live test here to see if people react. So people are freaking out now, like, oh my God, he's undressing. So for some of you, this is funny, but it's perfectly fine. This is perfectly fine if you don't get the joke, right? Because it means different things, right? I'm wearing a Rome 2 shirt, and this is a long-standing gag that we have. So, and it also says, Romani ite domum. How many get that joke? A lot of people didn't get that joke. And that's fine, again. But you have to remember, when you're talking to your audience, have to know what makes them tick and what doesn't make them tick. So you have to cater your message to your audience. The first one is, of course, a joke to the ongoing kind of riff I have with that. You're never going to get Rome 2, how much you even beg for it. It's never going to happen. The second one is it's a Monty Python reference. And not everyone gets that. To me, it's very funny, and that's fine. It's a niche joke, right? So you do your homework. It's like when you're applying for a job. If you go to a job interview and have no idea what the company is about, you haven't really prepared, right? So make sure you know who you're pitching to and try to figure out what they know and prepare your message for that. It's very important. It's the main thing. Secondly, pitches are all about gameplay. This GIF is kind of ruined, but it shows a fair bit of fun gameplay. And that's my kind of point, is that you have to make sure that you include a lot of information about why your game is fun. It has to be clear what kind of player fantasy you're fulfilling in your pitch. What's the dream you're selling, essentially? And you have to be able to show this through gameplay. You could have a very high-level concept of what's happening, but if you talk about Crusader Kings, it's about living out your medieval power fantasy of running a dynasty. It sounds great on a super high level, but you also need to be able to describe that in terms of what are you doing minute to minute in the game that's feeding into that fantasy. And keep it simple. You don't need to be a wordsmith or Shakespeare in order to describe what a game is about. Most of us in here could actually tell our friends that haven't heard about Stellaris or the next Paradox game what the game is about in very simple terms. And use words in your pitch that actually is the same words that you would use to talk to your friend, another gamer. Because we are also gamers, and we speak the same language. So no need for super fancy words, just keep it simple. The third tip is you have to show how everyone is making money, right? Games are art, yes, but everyone needs to eat and live somewhere as well. So games are also business. And thus, you need to have a pretty good, strong business case. If you can't explain how the publishing part, whoever you're pitching to, is making money and you're making money and everyone's happy, it's never going to really work. So you need some kind of business case. And how do you craft a good business case? Well, that's a separate talk. You can talk to me later about that. But you need to make sure that this is included in some way or form in your presentation. A fourth pointer is that you need to be able to help the reader visualize and understand what the end goal is. It doesn't mean that you need to have a finished game and show exactly what the game will look like, nor do you need to have a lot of concept art to show what the game will look like. But you need to be able to use some kind of visual aids of some sort. Most of the pitches that we put together, just shamelessly steal concept art from other game. Like for instance, Rome 2 that the Creative Assembly made. They have fantastic art. So if you would put together a pitch on something that's Rome themed, just use their concept art. They have fantastic concept art, and remember, it's an internal document. You're not publishing it, So use concept art that others have made to give people an understanding of what the game feel will be like. And then you can talk about other games as visual references. It's not going to be it's going to be at least as pretty as Don't Starve, but it's never going to reach, this game or that game. And you can use different games as a reference to box in stuff. And this is actually enough in terms of helping somebody understand what the visuals will be like. It'll have the same camera as Diablo, but the art style will be more painted like Borderlands or something. So you can try to help somebody understand this, even though you don't know how to paint, don't have an artist on the team, and don't have money to actually hire one. It's of course better if you can actually show it, but it's not a requirement by any means. And if you can't visualize what you're putting together, maybe you shouldn't touch it at all and just let them fill in the blanks with their own imagination, right? So, tip 5, it's really important also to include some information about the team, the super team that's behind the game that will actually bring it to life. Because, again, we talked about an idea is good, but if you don't have the right team, it's almost worth nothing, right? In the same way, I wouldn't take a great grand strategy concept and give it to Colossal Order to make it, and I wouldn't perhaps give a city management concept to Johan Andersson's team because he hasn't built that many city builders. So you have to show that the team is prepared and know how to make that kind of game. So those are my 5 high-level pointers for how to put together a pitch, right? So know your audience. It's all about gameplay. Let's review. The business case, some visual target, and your team. It's super simple. A good pitch doesn't need to be more than 2-3 pages. What does go wrong, though, is that people do stuff in their pitches that they generally shouldn't do. I'll just throw a bunch up here and we can talk about them. Avoid making a lot of grammar and spelling mistakes. If a pitch document is fairly important, if you didn't pay attention to the grammar there, it kind of sends the signal that you might not even pay attention to the other things that you're doing either. Next one is maybe more of a pet peeve of mine, but do not email me from a Hotmail address. I have a Hotmail address. I'm sure it's perfectly fine using a Hotmail address. But if that's your primary business email, it kind of sends me the signal that you might not have an idea what you're doing. Somebody asked me, is Yahoo okay? I'm like, no, Yahoo is not okay either. Great. I have a Yahoo email address. I use it, but not for game pitches to other companies. Gmail is I've drank a lot of Gmail Kool-Aid, so Gmail is perfectly fine. Come again?
What about .gov?
.gov, that's interesting. But preferably don't use your work email if you have a... Yeah. And also, it's not here in the pointers, but do not CC every publisher in the industry when you send us the pitch. This has happened several times. And it's the kind of shotgun approach, maybe somebody will do it, but usually doesn't work. Do not share 5 pages of that night when you were out drinking and came home late, depressed, you tripped, you hit your head, you had a vision, you sat down 9 hours, wrote something, that was bad, then 9 years later you picked up the idea again and then it was good. We don't need to know that. You can tell me that over beers later when I can't escape from you, but if I'm reading a document, that's not the critical part of the pitch that you'll be sending to us. Talk about the thing you love, not why you love it or the reasons around it. Keep it short and sweet. A pitch is really there to just get your foot in the door. And just like in a cover letter for an interview, you're just there to get somebody's interest, and then you have a face-to-face presentation. That's really where you can get the message across. So keep it short and sweet, and then have an extended kind of version at hand if they ask for one. So the best pitches are when I read them, I'm like, holy shit, this is great. I understand it perfectly. Do you have more materials? Boom. That's the best case scenario. And you also shouldn't kind of overthink the pitches and start thinking for the other party and start talking about like, well, Paradox, I expect you guys to do marketing in this way for the game, and maybe you should go to PAX. Maybe have that, don't have the biggest stage, have the second biggest stage. You don't need to do those things. We're experts in our areas. You just focus on your bit. So those are the high-level kind of pointers. And as you can see, I try to keep it simple. It's not rocket science. It absolutely isn't. And you know, the best way is just put together a pitch and have somebody who's not your friend look at it. Have your friend send it to somebody else so you can get real honest feedback. Or your mother. Your mother, at least don't send it to my mother, that's for sure. Sorry, Mom, she still thinks I should get a real job. I tell her I'm doing fairly well. And she's like, go back and graduate. Be an engineer. Yeah. So that said, let's move on to back to Paradox, because I am assuming, and we actually want pitches and ideas. Not necessarily because we want to take your ideas and make games out of them, because we want to engage with you guys, with the community, and we want you guys to apply for jobs at Paradox or start your own studios and one day work with us. So the more you understand how we work in our business and stuff, and the more you pitch, the better you will become, and it's a good ecosystem. We can have a better conversation, I think, on the forums rather than jumping to, why haven't they announced Victoria 3? It's not gonna happen. So, Paradox has done many different types of games over the years. For those of you who followed us for a very long time, you know that nowadays we're very focused on strategy, RPG, and management games. But over the years, we've done a lot of action games. Mountain Blade, anyone play Mountain Blade here? It's a great game. Have you seen the jump animations? But it doesn't matter, it has the world's best gameplay, right? Magicka, any Magicka players? Any Magicka wizards here? One, baby, yeah, there you go. And War of the Roses we've done, and we've done other, action games. And we've made a fair amount of money on those games. And we've tried different, genres. And we'll keep trying different genres for several reasons, because we want to keep growing the company, we want to try different things, and we know that a lot of you play a lot more than just Victoria 2. So we as a company we have a very long-term strategy, and we try to avoid ending up in what we call the Kodak moment. The Kodak company, they had their best year the year before they went bankrupt. Right? Their film sales were doing amazingly, right? And then suddenly, boom. So we don't want to be doing better and better with grand strategy games, and one day the business just goes out under us, because suddenly grand strategy games are not relevant anymore. And we see this in the industry. If you look at, for instance, the RTS genre, 15, 20 years ago compared to today, it's, the genre has evolved into something else. We can have a long conversation about this. So we'll keep on trying different things. But over the years, the point is we've tried different things, and we think that we have our kind of formula or soup that allows us to try games. And we've done this largely by learning, and we learn by failing. So we have, and you've probably seen a couple of posters on the courtyard, we have what we call the Paradox pillars that we've developed over the course of the years. These are our DNA. This is the DNA of a Paradox game. And the ideal Paradox game lives up to these quite well. The more they live up to them, the better, for several reasons. Every game doesn't have to live up to these perfectly, but we think that a game that followed these pillars have a fundamentally stronger business model, right? And I'll come back to this. Essentially, we want the game to be replayable. Somebody was comparing to our games to other forms of entertainment and what the cost is for 2 hours of entertainment and what you get in one of our games. I think that's a perfect example. We're not deliberately setting out to be the cheapest form of, or the most, economical form of entertainment, but it's a big part of it. We want games that you can play for thousands of hours, literally. We want the games to be intellectually challenging. You could be hardcore in many ways. You could argue that Call of Duty is hardcore, absolutely, but it's not it's not the way we try to be hardcore. We want to challenge your mind, not your reflexes. We might do both sometimes, but it's always the mind. Creativity is really important for us. We're not necessarily out to tell you a specific story. We want to make games where you can tell us stories and show us your creativity. This might be through after-action reports or just weird questions about how can I marry my sister on the forums. Always relevant. If it's you've built something amazing in City Skylines, or if you created a mod for one of our games. So giving you the ability to be creative and tell your story and live out a power fantasy in our games is very important to us. You could, of course, create a very cinematic game experience that's linear and high-end and fantastic. That's fine. A lot of people make a lot of money that way, but that's not how we make our money and how we run our business. We talk a lot about functionality versus form, and we try to avoid getting into a graphical arms race by jamming in more graphics in a game. We don't want high production values, we want the right production values. I think, you can spend an infinite amount of money. And what makes me depressed as a gamer is when there's a cool, really good AAA game out with a lot of great gameplay and depth, but people on the forums are talking about, is it 1080p and 60 FPS? As if that matters in the grand scheme of things when you've made this wonderful game. And nobody's talking about gameplay, which is the heart of the matter. We've made games that you can play for thousands of hours. What's the point in having that kind of game if you can't learn how to play the game? Hearts of Iron 3. But this is something that, 5-6 years ago, we were not good at this. But if you look at the evolution of our games and see what Stellaris did, for instance, we've definitely taken steps in making sure that you actually can learn what's happening. Because I think that a lot of our games have very strong power fantasies. And you hear stories about the game. It's the same with DayZ or Eve or even Dwarf Fortress. You hear these stories about this emergent gameplay that arises, and it just sounds amazing. Same with CK. But you start playing the game, and it's like, where's the gameplay? I'm working my way through menus and stuff, and it takes time to learn and get past those kind of things. But once you're past them, that's when you can marry your sister. Again, key feature. And finally, the final pillar, and these are in order of importance somewhat, but the final pillar is that you should be able to nerd out about the subject matter, essentially. If you have real-world knowledge about orbital mechanics, it should help you in the game if the game is about orbital mechanics. If you know everything about Flak 88s, it should help you in a Hearts of Iron game, right? So you can play the game all night, then you get on the subway, and you read about the SS Totenkopf on Wikipedia all the way to work, and you fantasize about SS Totenkopf, and then 8 hours later, you're back home, and you're living out your power fantasy of, conquering Europe with the finest elite units. Right, controversial issues in a lot of our games. Yeah. So we also feel that these type of games are underserved or have been underserved, games that live up to these. And also we feel that we understand them well. We've been doing them for a very long time. We play these kind of games and we find them very nerdy. So I'm gonna just give you briefly a run of a couple of examples of games that I would absolutely feel live up to these pillars, but are for circumstantial reasons not games that we are currently publishing. So these are perfect examples of games that are really very replayable. A couple of our own and external games that you can play for a bajillion hours. Intellectually challenging, Magic. We have a Magic draft going actually later today. It's a free draft. We have slots left if anyone wants to jump into the draft and you get to keep the cards. Please do that. Magic is one of the finest games designed, I think. And one of the best games out there is Kerbal Space Program, one of my absolute favorites. So really try it out. And these games are the type of games where if you're smart in real life, you actually do a whole lot better in the game. And you feel smart when you're succeeding. So there's a great feedback loop of you patting yourself in the back. And if you're competitive like me, when you fail in these games, you feel stupid. Right, creativity. These are examples of games that offer a lot of creativity in their own way. I could have put Minecraft here as well. But these are good examples that allow you to do things in creative ways and put your mark in the world or around it. Here are a number of games that I feel are aesthetically pleasing and achieve a very distinct look while they're not spending, they don't have 80-man art teams building, lighting weapons or building 3D barrels all day long. So it's absolutely possible to create deep games with infinite replayability and not spend an ungodly amount of money on art. So again, coming back to the right production values rather than high production values. And of course, we have our artists at PDS do a tremendous job in creating just the right amount of content for you guys to be able to live out these power fantasies. And I think that Crusader Kings is perhaps the best example. I didn't put it here, but we use very beautiful imagery in the events, right? And you see this little fantasy, just this little moment of everyday life, and then there's this beautiful narrative, and then there's a lot of gameplay that you actually don't see. But you're stringing together this fantasy in your head about what actually happened. So we're just using the right amount of production values to take that fantasy to the right level. Here are a couple of examples of games that from a design perspective and a visual perspective are really good at teaching their games, but still retaining a fair amount of depth. Sure, you can complain that Hearthstone has too much RNG, it does, but it's dead simple to get to understand and learn how to play Hearthstone, and then you kind of move on. Civ is a beautiful example in the sense that you start with a warrior and a settler, and you have very few choices. Which direction do I want to walk in, and do I want to settle a city? You can, of course, screw up majorly by not settling quite on the wrong spot, of course, but you're not encountering kind of a analysis paralysis situation with 100 different screens screaming at you at the same time. I won't name any names. But Stellaris obviously takes a huge cue from Civilization, where you start in one solar system, you have one science ship, a limited number of options to go from. And games that you can nerd out. And again, I put Magic up because I'm a huge Magic nerd. I love it. It's a great example of a game that has a lot for you to take part of outside of the game. Again, Kerbal Space Program. And football is perhaps the best example of, there's an infinite amount of stuff you can take part of outside the game of Football Manager and dig deeper. And the same goes with Hearts of Iron, right? So these things are it's the DNA of a Paradox game. And if a game doesn't live up to these, we won't do it. And we've said no to a lot of games that have been very successful in their afterwards, right? I've said no to Rocket League, that sold a fair bit of copies. We said no to World of Tanks. Even, we would get approached with a lot of different concepts all the time. Psychonauts 2 was pitched to us at some point, and I'm a huge Psychonauts fan, but what does Paradox know about publishing those kind of games? We wouldn't have been the right partner for those guys. So they went on and found somebody else, right? So we try to do games that we understand and do well because we want to be a good development partner for our publishing partners as well. So when the guys and girls from Harebrained Schemes approached us and said, hey, we need somebody who can help us publish and market a mech strategy game, we're like, hell yeah, we can do that. Right? So these things really are part of our DNA, and we'll keep on saying no to games that don't live up to these games, even if they could make a lot of money, right? So the first question and it's not in presentation, but I can share this with you. When we get a game pitched to us, we have four high-level questions that we ask. First, is it a Paradox game? Does it live up to our pillars? 2, can it make money, right? Third, does the developer have what it takes in order for it to become reality, right? Because making games is very hard. And fourth, do we as a publisher or company have what it takes in order to make this a success? If the answer is no to these questions, we kind of stop. But the first question is it a game for Paradox? Does it live up to our pillars? And then we can have a conversation about, okay, so how come you did X, Y, or Z? Because I don't feel that lives up to the pillars. And if you look at the pillars and where we are today, maybe it's not so surprising that we haven't done Magicka 3. Because Magicka is a fairly action-based game. It requires a lot of brain also to succeed with the action, but it's a linear, story-driven action game largely that's done in about 14 to 15 hours. If we were to do a Magicka 3, maybe we would do it in the style of Diablo or Path of Exile, if you would like that. But that's the kind of game that you could play for at least a couple of hundred hours, for sure. But they wouldn't have to have a different structure. It's less about narrative, it's more about other progression loops. Right, so let's talk about getting your foot in the door. And I just want to check out how I'm doing for time. I'm good. So after all of this, you're still like, you actually still want to pitch a game to us? I'm going to give you an even more condensed and smaller and better version of doing this, so it's dead simple. And it's useful if you want to pitch something to us, and if you don't want to pitch something to us, it's still a useful format to convey an idea to somebody. And this could be, I don't want to go too far, but this is useful for somebody who wants to pitch something even at work that doesn't have to do with a game, right? For a very long time at Paradox, we talked about what makes our game successful. If we look at some of the games that we canceled, maybe Runemaster is a good example, Hollow Point, another example of a game that we started doing, announced it, and then we canceled it. And then we looked at games that were very successful, Stellaris, Crusader Kings, City Skylines. One thing these games had in common, that the ones that succeeded and the ones that didn't succeed, was that the succeeding ones had very strong visions, a very clear and understandable visions for what the game wanted to achieve, while the other games had a more wishy-washy, all-over-the-place kind of vision. We did a game a while back called Empire that wasn't that great, but it could have been pretty good. One of the reasons why it kind of went wrong was that if you'd asked me, the guy who signed the game or found the game and started it up, you talked to the lead designer, the lead producer, the marketing team, what is the game about? You would probably have gotten like 4 or 5 different answers. And this is because we didn't do a good enough job in initially establishing what the vision for the game was. And then we went about trying to come up with what's a good way to create a vision? And this is very hard, right? There are a couple of very good examples of, my favorite example is John F. Kennedy's quote for the Apollo program, essentially. We want to put a man on the moon and return him safely within a decade. It has a very clear goal. It's a high-flying thing. You could walk up into anyone in NASA, from Werner von Braun to a secretary, and ask him, what are you working on? What are you trying to achieve? And everyone would say, we're putting a man on the moon. It's a very understandable vision. Everyone can buy into it. You understand it. You want it to achieve. But it is... it's not that easy to do unless you are John F. Kennedy and have his speechwriters, right? So we try to come up with perfect ways of condensing this into one sentence, and we realized this is the wrong way to do it. So what we've actually ended up with is a 4-pronged approach of 4 different elements that we feel live. If you fill out these boxes, you can actually convey what the game vision is, or what might be the same thing for a movie or a book or an idea at work, to be honest, right? An elevator pitch, for those of you who don't know, literally comes from the term, it's a Hollywood term, essentially, where you see Steven Spielberg is in a hotel elevator, the doors are closing, and you just run right in before the doors close, and you say, hey, Steven, I have an idea for a movie. And he has to listen. He cannot not listen. He has to listen to your pitch. And you have his undivided attention for 30 seconds. And if your idea is good, he might want to do it. So it's that 30-second window you have for greatness, right? So you need to have an elevator pitch that's short, sweet, and really gets the message across in a condensed way. It can't go into detail. It has to be fairly high level and sell the dream, right? The game pillars is essentially the same thing as the Paradox pillars, but on a game level. So one of the pillars for Crusader Kings 3, for instance, hypothetically, could be that the game is focused on characters. Characters matter. Everything in the game design should feed back into characters, their traits, everything there, right? That would be an example of a pillar for CK3, or 4, or 5, or 6. But it wouldn't be a pillar for City Skylines or Paradox as a whole. If we'd make, for instance, a fantasy city builder with a lot of characters, maybe it would make sense to have a character focus there. So it differs from game to game. A consumer promise is essentially what is the game promising to you if you buy it? What's the implicit or actually explicit promise to you as a gamer? And it's a very direct message. Like, if you buy this game, I promise you'll live out your fantasy as a Jedi. That would be Force Unleashed, for instance. Or for, you can use any, for Mario, maybe it would be more weird. But for Vampire the Masquerade, Bloodlines, it would be you actually live the life of a vampire. You get to be a vampire full on, right? So this is the promise to the player, right? The tagline is a kind of a fourth appendage that we use to kind of tie a bow around the entire thing and wrap the entire thing up with a more, kind of a markety spin to it. I'm going to show you the one that we actually have for City Skylines. This was not necessarily put in place at the time of signing, but it grew out of, this process grew out of the clarity that City Skylines had. And this is not necessarily something that we would use externally. I really want to use that as a disclaimer. But it's internally, if we wanted to describe this to somebody of what we tried to achieve, this would be it. Again, we could not use this externally. But if you want to describe City Skylines to somebody, it would essentially be City Skylines is a SimCity 5 that the fans wanted but never received. And that's it. And then you just stare at Steven Spielberg for 27 awkward seconds. And then he goes from, that's a great idea, to get away from me, right? And then we go into detail on how we want to achieve that, right? And SimCity, I played a lot of SimCity. I loved it. But it wasn't the type of hardcore gaming experience I wanted as a Paradox hardcore player. So we tried to do it in a different flavor, I think. So the game pillars for the game essentially were creative replayability. The replayability comes from being creative. The game should be system-driven. It should be easy to get into. It has the right production values. And again, for City Skylines, it was a perfect example. We looked at it and said, holy shit, it's going to take so much effort to create all those kind of buildings. And we don't have that big teams. I think if anyone from Colossal Order is here, they can correct me, but I think the original team was about 8 people, and they had some art outsourcing. While the Maxis team that made SimCity, they were close to 100 people. A lot of artists. And the game absolutely looks gorgeous. Absolutely, and arguably looks much better than vanilla City Skylines. But again, we don't want to compete on visual looks. So we said, what's the bare minimum of visual fidelity that we can have in the game, under which point people go, God damn, that's an ugly game. And after which point people are like, I don't know, it doesn't bother me, but it doesn't get a lot of extra score. So we said, if that's the bar, let's just go right here, right? So if you look at vanilla City Skylines, it maybe doesn't have that much of a visual variety. If you build a city, some blocks will kind of look the same. But at the same time, we said, we know that modding is a huge thing. There's a huge modding community. A ton of people want to do modding. Let's focus on that. And we're quite confident that, a few days after release, there will be actually a lot of additional content. So we do good enough, and then we hope and help that the community will help us get even further. And that's exactly what happened. 2 days after City Skylines was out, somebody had recreated the San Andreas from GTA, or what it was. Amazing, right? So we talk about the right production values. It looks good enough, and then some, until you reach a point where it's a hygiene factor. You don't smell great, but you don't smell bad either. So we're good. We also wanted the game to be grounded in reality. If you wanted to create a small village in Norway or create a US sprawl, you should be able to do that. And that's one of the things we set out to do. So the kind of consumer promise, and I don't quite remember if this was the external one that we used, was to build a city of your dreams, mod it, and share it online. That was the kind of thing we were trying to achieve, and the promise to you as a gamer. And that implied big cities, right? It allowed you to mod things, right? And the kind of tagline that wrapped everything up and got everyone on board was that it's a modern take on a classic city builder, of course. And like I mentioned, we say no to a lot of games that could be Paradox games, and we end up in situations where we don't sign them, they go to somebody else. I screw up, approach the business from a weird angle. I would have loved to sign, RimWorld or Kerbal Space Program or Don't Starve or the guy's next game. But it's too late and not going to happen because they're, for a lot of different reasons. It's hard. I don't know how much time we have. It's 0. Dunzo? Okay. So as per usual, I have kind of a question segment. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to run up to the first slide again. My Twitter handle is there. I'm always available for ideas, questions, or kindly worded insults that I'd be happy to listen to, engage with. We had a long conversation yesterday with the Meow and Taxes mod team about the industry and business as a whole. We talked about a lot of these things. I'd be happy to sit down all day long and listen to ideas and chat about these things. If you feel that we have stuff in our portfolio that doesn't make any sense whatsoever, or if there are huge holes in our portfolio that you would like us to fill, let us know. Like a modern take on Transport Tycoon. Anyone? Yes. So these are the kind of things I need to hear from you guys so I can go out and find these games, and hopefully developers start pitching them to us, and I can convince the other people to start doing them. So unfortunately, no time for questions now. They're kicking me off, but I'm going to be available right outside and in the courtyard. Please don't hesitate to approach me and talk to me. I bite very hard. So thanks, everyone.